"Too small for me, but I'll try," the giant woman whispered to the lone cowboy. Witness this unbelievable, true, inspired story right here on Whisper of the Past. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share where you're watching from. Let's get started. The desert stretched endlessly, a sea of red earth and jagged mesas baked beneath the relentless Arizona sun. Heat shimmered in waves, rising from the sand like ghosts of forgotten travelers. Jake Sullivan rode slow, his tired horses' hooves kicking up dust as they trudged across land that seemed intent on swallowing them whole. His lips were dry, cracked from 3 days of hard riding, his canteen nearly drained to its last swallow. He had been chasing rustlers, men who'd driven off with his cattle under the cover of darkness, and every mile of pursuit had dragged him deeper into this desolate country where the wind whispered secrets and the shadows stretched longer than any man's patience. Jake had grown up in the saddle, toughened by dust storms, hard winters, and endless miles of trail. But even for him, this stretch of desert was testing the limits of his endurance. His horse's ribs showed with each labored breath, and the creature's ears twitched nervously at sounds Jake could not hear. There were legends about these lands, tales told in saloons from Tucson to Phoenix, whispered over whiskey by men who swore they'd seen things no sober mind could believe. Most dismissed them as desert fever dreams, hallucinations born of thirst and heat. But tonight, under a sky turning amber with dusk, Jake was about to learn those stories were more truth than lie. It began as a shadow against the setting sun. At first, he thought it was another mesa, a towering rock formation carved by time. But as his horse stumbled forward, the shape shifted. Auburn hair caught the breeze, glinting like copper fire. Then the figure moved, slow, graceful, impossibly large. Jake's breath caught. A woman, taller than the saguaro cacti and nearly as high as the canyon cliffs, stood watching him. Her figure rose nearly 20 feet, her long limbs casting shadows across the desert floor. Her presence was not monstrous, but majestic, as though she belonged to the land more than any settler ever could. Jake reined in his horse, muttering under his breath, "Well, I'll be—" The stories he'd heard rushed back. The giant woman of the desert, the spirit said to appear to lost men, the ghostly guardian who walked where no human dared. Some claimed she was the curse of a medicine man, others that she was an angel, bound to the earth. Jake had never believed in such nonsense. But now, staring at her, sweat cooling on his neck despite the heat, he wasn't so sure. The giant woman's eyes found him, glowing softly with a kindness that eased his fear. She lowered herself slowly, kneeling so that even then her towering frame loomed over him like a cathedral of flesh and bone. The ground trembled gently as her knees touched earth. Jake's horse reared, nostrils flaring, but he held the reins firm. His heart pounded like a war drum. Her lips parted and a voice, like distant thunder, rolled across the desert. Yet it was gentle, touched with something almost sorrowful. "Too small for me, but I'll try," she whispered. Jake blinked, unsure if he'd truly heard her or if the heat had driven him mad. He cleared his throat, his voice hoarse from thirst. "Try what, Mom?" She smiled, and it was as if the desert itself bloomed. The harsh lines of her face softened, her expression radiant as sunrise, breaking over canyon walls. "To help you, little cowboy," she said, her words carrying both warmth and melancholy. "You're lost, aren't you? And thirsty." Her hand moved, slow and careful, each finger large as a fence post. Jake's horse screamed and tried to bolt, but in a motion impossibly delicate, the giant woman scooped both horse and rider into her palm. Jake gripped the saddle horn, expecting to be crushed or dropped, but her touch was as tender as a mother's with a newborn. She cradled them as though they were the most fragile treasures in the world. From this height, the desert stretched endless valleys and canyons painted in gold by the sinking sun. Jake's fear slowly gave way to awe. The wind caught her hair, strands of copper tumbling around him like ribbons of flame. Her scent was of sage and rain, impossibly fresh in a land that had known only dust for weeks. "Who are you?" Jake finally asked, his voice steadier than he felt. Her strides began then, each step covering more ground than Jake's horse could in an hour. The desert rolled beneath them like a map unfolding. "I was once like you," she said, her tone threaded with memory. "A settler's daughter. Mary Catherine O'Brien. My father staked land here, my mother baked bread in a small clay oven by the river, and I dreamed of dances in town, of a life as small and simple as any girl's." She paused, her free hand brushing a strand of hair from her face as she gazed at the horizon. "But the land had other plans for me." Jake listened, his mind torn between disbelief and the undeniable reality of her presence. "One night," she continued, "a storm rolled in. I sought shelter in the hills, hiding in a cave marked by the symbols of the Apache. I was too young to know the weight of what I touched, too careless to respect the shrine I found within. I pressed my hand to its stone, begging for safety, and the sky answered." She gestured to herself, her massive body silhouetted against the crimson twilight. This was the gift or curse it left me. Jake could hear the sorrow in her words, the ache of years spent apart from kin and community. "And your family?" he asked softly. "They tried," Mary Catherine whispered, her voice trembling like the desert wind through canyon cracks. "But how could they understand? My mother wept, my father prayed, the townsfolk fled in fear. To them, I was no longer their daughter, no longer a neighbor, but something unnatural, dangerous. So, I left. Better the desert's silence than the screams of those I loved." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the steady rhythm of her colossal footsteps. Jake felt the weight of her loneliness settle heavy in his chest. She had traded everything for survival, becoming a shadow in the land she once called home. And yet here she was, helping a stranger with a kindness that few humans would show. As night fell, stars spilled across the sky, bright and sharp against the black canvas. She moved as though she knew every hidden trail, every secret spring, every stone carved with forgotten stories. Her giant form seemed part of the desert itself, as eternal as the mesas. Jake leaned back in his saddle, still resting in the cradle of her palm. "You say you're cursed, ma'am," he murmured, "but I see something else. I see a guardian spirit watching over fools like me." Her laughter rang out, low and musical, a sound that shimmered in the cool night air. "Guardian spirit," she repeated, tasting the words like something sweet. "Perhaps. Or perhaps just a woman who lost too much and tries, in small ways, to give something back." Jake's throat tightened. He wanted to say more, to tell her she was more than she believed, but words seemed too small for the truth of her. So he sat in silence, letting the rhythm of her strides and the whisper of the desert speak for them both. Somewhere ahead, a hidden valley waited, green with life in the heart of the wasteland. Jake could see the shimmer of water under moonlight, and for the first time in days, hope stirred within him. Whatever happened next, whether he found his cattle, whether he ever told a soul about this night, he knew one thing for certain. The giant woman of the desert was real, and her story was now bound to his. And though she believed him too small for her world, she tried anyway.
The moon was high when they reached the ridge, its pale glow spilling silver across the desert. Jake Sullivan leaned forward in awe, his breath catching at the sight below. Nestled between the cliffs, untouched by the merciless sun, lay a valley, green as springtime. A ribbon of water shimmered through the grass, reflecting the starlight like a blade of polished glass. Cottonwoods lined its edges, their leaves whispering in the night air. It was a paradise hidden from maps, a secret oasis the desert kept close to its heart. The giant woman's stride slowed as she descended carefully into the valley. Even in her enormity, she moved with a grace that seemed almost reverent, as though she respected the sanctity of this hidden place. She lowered her hand and set Jake and his horse gently upon the ground beside the spring. His horse staggered forward and plunged its muzzle into the water, drinking greedily. Jake knelt down and scooped a handful for himself, the cold liquid burning sweet down his parched throat. Relief flooded his body, the ache in his bones easing for the first time in days. He looked up at her towering form, her silhouette outlined against the star-filled sky. "This ain't on any map I've ever seen," he said softly. Mary Catherine's lips curved in a faint smile. "Few places worth finding are," she replied, her voice carrying across the valley like the wind rustling through leaves. She sank to her knees beside him, her vast form shrinking the valley around them, and yet there was nothing threatening in her presence. Only a quiet strength, as if she were a sentinel left behind by time itself. Jake wiped his mouth, water dripping down his chin. "You've been bringing folks here, haven't you? Lost travelers, men like me?" She nodded, strands of auburn hair falling over her shoulders like rivers of fire in the moonlight. "It's all I can do. When I see them wandering, stumbling, toward death, I guide them here. Too small for me to ever share their lives again, but I try to help in the ways I can. That is my penance, perhaps, or my purpose." Jake studied her face, noting the loneliness shadowed in her eyes. He thought of the years she must have spent in solitude, watching lives pass her by while she lingered on the edges of their world. "If this is penance," he said, his voice steady, "then it's the kindest one I've ever seen. You're not cursed, Miss Mary Catherine. You're blessed. The desert needs a guardian angel, and that's exactly what you are." For a moment, silence stretched between them, heavy and fragile. Then she laughed softly, a sound like wind chimes touched by a gentle breeze. "Guardian angel," she repeated, almost as though testing the weight of the words. "Perhaps. Or perhaps I'm just a woman who couldn't go home." Jake stood, brushing the dust from his trousers. He gazed up at her, small beneath the weight of her presence, yet unafraid. "Ma'am, I reckon even angels get lonely." Her smile faded into something tender, wistful. "Lonely, yes, but I can bear it if it means others live." He turned toward his horse, who had already filled its belly with water and cropped at the lush grass. "I've still got business," he admitted. "Rustlers, they took my cattle. I was chasing them when the desert near swallowed me whole." She lifted one vast hand, pointing a finger toward the north. Her nail gleamed like ivory in the moonlight. They went toward the painted desert. If you follow the hidden trail through Eagle's Gap, you'll find them before they reach the border. The land bends in strange ways there. You would not have seen it, not without guidance. Jake followed the line of her gesture, squinting. Even from this vantage, the canyon she pointed to seemed little more than a dark scar among the rocks, easily overlooked. He whistled low. "You just saved me weeks of riding, ma'am." Her eyes softened. "Then my trying was not in vain." He prepared to leave, tightening his saddle straps and filling his canteen from the spring. He looked up at her one last time. She knelt there, monumental yet fragile in her solitude, her eyes reflecting the stars. "If I live to tell this story," he said quietly, "no one will believe me." She tilted her head, the corners of her mouth lifting in a small smile. "Some truths are not meant for saloons, little cowboy. Some truths are carried only in the heart." He tipped his hat to her, an old gesture of respect that suddenly felt like a prayer. "Then I'll carry it, always." Her hand rose in farewell, fingers outstretched like the branches of a great oak. "Ride safe, Jake Sullivan, and remember, too small for me, but I'll try." The words echoed softly as he swung into the saddled and turned his horse toward the canyon trail. He glanced back once, hoping to fix her image in his memory. But she was gone. Vanished like a mirage swallowed by moonlight, as though the desert had drawn her back into itself. The valley lay empty, save for the spring and the whisper of leaves. Jake rode hard through Eagle's Gap, the secret trail she had shown him. It twisted like a serpent through the cliffs, a path no man without her guidance could have found. At dawn, he came upon the rustlers camped in the shadow of the painted desert, their stolen cattle penned in makeshift corrals. With the element of surprise on his side, he took back what was his, driving them off with the barrel of his rifle and the fury of a man who'd ridden too far to be cheated. 3 days later, weary but triumphant, Jake returned his cattle to their rightful pasture. His neighbors clapped him on the back, called him lucky, said he must have had the devil's own fortune guiding him. He only smiled, never correcting them, for what he had seen was not the devil's work, but something far greater. On clear nights, when the sky stretched endless and the stars burned bright, Jake would sit by his fire and look out over the desert. The wind would whistle low through the sage, carrying voices only the lonely could hear. And when it did, he would whisper a thank you into the dark, a prayer offered to the woman who had saved him. And somewhere beyond the mesas, where no map could reach, Mary Catherine O'Brien, the giant woman of the desert, would pause in her lonely watch and smile. For though the world was too small for her, she tried anyway. And in her trying, she had become not just a legend, but a guardian, angel whose story would live forever in the whispers of the past.